If you want to share, and it's okay to, I mean, as much detail as you can provide, what was like the first deal you invested in, and how did you get access? How did it happen? I know everyone's got a good story around, how they first invest, what got them excited, right? So,
Of course. Thanks for inviting me, and I'm super excited to join this conversation. Uh, I'm a angel and an operator. I've built enterprise products and consumer products last about 11 and a half years focused on consumer media products at Amazon. I'm currently leading podcasts group, and part of that was the health product music and I'm on the investment side. I've been investing for about 12 years now, and early stage sector agnostic software companies. Yeah, I've been a tinkerer and product builder, so I've always been closer to the entrepreneurial ecosystem. Many of my friends have started companies, and any problem I try to solve, I look for, hey, is there anyone else doing it, and I'll just go and talk to the founders or the teams building it to see how they were approaching the problems. And more often than not, those conversations end up getting into, hey, how could I be helpful, and could I write a small check? Now, I was working on a bunch of voice APIs, and this is 2008 in Seattle. And I think I got introduced to Jeff Lawson, who was also in the Seattle area. He was Twilio at the time. And we met up for coffee. And as he was demoing, it was not a pitch. I think they had built 3 verbs, for making a phone call through an API. And said, hey, how long would it take? Google had just acquired a company called Grand Central. It was like a phone system. And we we're just chatting about like how long would it take to build Grand Central in using just Twilio. And Jeff, to his credit, said, hey, it should not take more than half an hour. And so let's build it. So he actually just coded it up, opened up the terminal at a coffee shop in Seattle and just coded it up. And just at the end of the conversation, we just decided, hey, let me know how I can be helpful. And whenever the time is right, please let me write a small check. So that's how got very lucky in the first investment being in Twilio that has gone to do really well. And Jeff and team have continued to just exceed all expectations.
Was it like the demo itself, or did you do more background on Jeff and his history, or just curious on certain things that triggered in your mind,
Yeah, I think likely it was primarily the demo. I think it was actually not even a pitch meeting. I was just so impressed by definitely by Jeff, but also by that was actual working product. And I was very familiar with the problem space. So I knew how hard it was. I knew how hard it was to use the open source the voice APIs, or how hard it was to get actual contracts done with AT&T or Sprint Nextel at the time to get minutes. So the fact that that existed, and then Jeff and team were able to get there so quickly was sufficient, and primarily because I had some context about the industry. I used to work on voice APIs earlier in my career.
No, I think we're all adapting here. No, I can hear you great. But Kinton was getting a great story around, getting an opportunity to invest in Twilio. It's kind of his first angel investment, which is a hell of a win. So great stuff. Why don't we actually, we have a slate of topics to go over, but Shishir, why don't we transition to you in terms of just a little bit of background and history, and then, how you got into angel investing, with maybe a story of your first angel investment. So, yeah.
First, I'll have to think back. That's it. So I'm Shishir Mehrotra. I'm the co-founder and CEO of a company called Coda. We make a new type of document, blends the best parts of document, spreadsheets, presentations, applications into one new surface. Before this, I spent about 6 years at Google. Most of the time I was responsible for the YouTube products. And before that, spent 6 years at Microsoft working on Windows Office, SQL Server, and started my first company before that called Centrata. That was done sort of out of college. Angel investing, I mean, it's interesting, the prompt for this. I think probably the first major one I did was Spotify. I'm thinking if that's if that quite qualifies. I think we'll talk about some of the different patterns of angel investing and so on. And in a lot of cases for me, my investments start as close relationships or advisorships, then happen to turn into an investment. So I was helping the company for a long time before I actually put up any capital for it. But I think that was first, and since then I've probably done 50 or so different types of investments or advisory relationships and so on. So, I think interesting ones: Spotify, Instacart, Pinterest, Grammarly, Figma, Superhuman. Lots of fun companies.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, great lineup. Awesome. No, I think it's always just good to see. I think that's a great also lesson there around. A lot of this is relationship driven. It's kind of getting trust and comfort. Unlike us VC investors, where maybe it's a little more. There's a process. I think it's more organic on your end. So we've surveyed a bunch of you. Actually, appreciate many of you who in the audience provided some quick feedback or input on topics. One question that came up a lot, and there's a nuance here, is that I think the topic of the panel is around deal flow. But to be fair, like startups are starting every day. Deal flow is pretty straightforward. I mean, if you kind of put out your hat, you're going to get inflow, right? But I think the nuance here is around access, and it's around like how do you find those best opportunities? In many cases, it may not be coming to you. Maybe there's a degree of outreach or kind of being out there or what have you. But I wonder for both of you, like, how do you think about that delineation around either going after the opportunities that you think are really exciting as an angel investor, or maybe developing ways to build your reputation or personal brand so that those opportunities find you as well? Just open it for either of you can share. But I think this is a really interesting question that the group has come up with around access versus just blanket deal flow. So.
Sure, happy to. So I should say, and interesting here, Kenton's view on this too. I think for me, angel investing advising is clearly a side job. I have a company I run all day and so on, so I don't actually spend any time actively sourcing deals. I think of it as I think of my work with other companies as a way to give back to people. A lot of people help me along my path. And then as a way to learn, and so I'm always drawn towards things that are relevant and interesting, and so on. So that's so all of my investments and advisorships have been inbound from that perspective. I think but I get a lot of value out of it, and I think for me probably the biggest thing that I would suggest is to write, and I think it's interesting how much this is my philosophy at Coda as well, but I think writing is a great way to communicate for a lot of different reasons. Obviously, clarifies thinking and so on, but it will tend to bring people to you that are interested in your thought process. If I had a single piece, I wrote a piece a while back called 4 Minutes of Bundling that Eugen, I know you know well, and that one. It's a little bit of a sharp piece in terms of a topic that most people think about very differently. And it's amazing the set of people that want to chat about it more. And I always learn from it, and the piece gets better and better as we go. But that led to my relationship in Spotify. It's led to probably half of my investments, advisorships are somehow related to the topic of a slightly different viewpoint on subscriptions. There's a few other pieces like that I think have driven a lot of interest. I have a frame. This is sort of not directly related to advising, but I think one of the things people often miss in developing their careers is something I call the reputation net promoter score. And it's a very simple formula. It's take the set of people that would say you're awesome or remarkable in some way, and subtract the set of people that say you suck. But one caveat in reputation net promoter score is only awesome people are allowed to say you're awesome. Like, credit from others doesn't really matter, but anybody can say you suck. And it's an interesting test, as Kendall was saying. It's one thing you want to be helpful. You also want to be very cautious of not leaving negative experiences and so on. That those also build up because they'll be seen as a ratio. Like you said, anybody, and this is not just because you're advising or investing something. If you're hiring somebody, if you're joining somebody, so on. What's a natural thing to do? You reach out to common people we know, and you just kind of quickly weigh what portion of people said the person was awesome minus the set of people that said they suck. And I think it's a helpful test for how you engage with anybody, actually.
And that's interesting. I think in your approach, you may have like it's a non-financial goal. To your point, it's around learning. It's kind of giving back. I think on the podcast you provided before, you had a really great relationship with one of the best coaches, Bill Campbell, kind of in the Valley. And I think that's where you're, but I think that's great because like by having maybe a higher goal, I think you've done very well. The portfolio sounds to be doing very strongly, but it's good. It's not the intent. I think there's something more almost just thoughtful about kind of your approach. And I think the writing element makes a lot of sense. And then also, I just posted the formats of bundling. Highly recommend. I don't care whether you're investing or not. Everyone should read that post because there's a lot of applicability, not just to business, but also around just how you think about kind of strategy and overall kind of business approaches. So, but that said, so appreciate kind of that initial thinking about it, and then letting it happen, maybe happen more organically. So, Kinton, how about yourself? Yeah, just in terms of like getting out there, you know.
Yeah, I'll definitely plus one on writing. I think earlier in the days, I wrote a lot about just building products and reducing friction, and just the types of folks and teams that have reached out to me, after that has been just mind blowing. I'd also add one more thing because a lot of the deals tend to be inbound. I think the brand or the reputation or the skill set, that really is a function of how helpful and along what vectors have you been helpful to the teams that you already work with. Because founders, they start multiple companies, they talk to other founders, and a lot of the deals have been to friends and their networks. That hey, if somebody's one of my portfolio companies referred a bunch of companies actually to me, and I think in all of those emails, the introduction emails, the founder listed out that hey, here are the 3 or 4 things that Kinton had helped me on. And because the other founders also wanted some context on those, they reached out. So I'd say that reciprocity as well as being helpful around specific, deep items that may be useful in company building or product building, it goes a long way in terms of sourcing, winning deals.
Yeah, I think that's definitely right. I think the dynamic now versus even 5 or 10 years ago is that there's a lot of capital out there, a lot of folks who want to write checks, and founders sort of have the leverage and have their picks. And so I think having those, and then when they're filling out a syndicate, when a new founder is filling out a syndicate, and they may be talking, they're going to definitely reference you because they want to make sure they're diluting themselves. So it's an important decision they're making, right? And I think it's something where like it's a very quick decision process. If they can't find 2 or 3 things from a current founder, or for that matter, even a VC fund who's leading the round that can reference you quickly, then it's kind of like, oh, that person's not XYZ. You've got to really kind of have something crisp, clear, and actionable. Otherwise, the reputation won't be as strong as otherwise. So I think that's a great point.
Yeah, I'd add one quick thing. It was reminded me of a thing I was just reflecting upon recently. Like once you do a few angel investments, once you have a portfolio of a certain size, realize that you end up making all your money as an angel investor in the companies that succeed. But you end up making bulk of your reputation through how you dealt with the companies that were kind of tanking or not doing as well. And more often than not, I mean, the founders start another company, and there have been instances in my portfolio where the first company didn't work out, but the second company by the same founder has gone to do great things, and the founder was willing to bring me on board in the second round based on how I treated the founder and the team, especially when the first company was not doing so well, whether by being a shock absorber or just helping out in whichever way needed. So just one more add on how to be helpful there.
Yeah, no, I think that's a great point. I think, and for those of you who are maybe early on, and this is just also from my experiences working in venture, working with portfolio companies for about 10 years. First of all, like it's a rocky journey. There's no such thing as a sure bet. Companies that end up becoming unicorns or successful early on, they don't really quite look like that, right? So you most need to have a kind of open and objective and kind of like a clear mind around helping everyone and being careful. And then I think Shir made a note, and I think he'll be back in a second here, around it's not just adding value. You got to do that. You have the expertise you want to leverage, but it's the little things on how you do it. Are you kind of encouraging? Are you responsive? Are you making time? And sometimes, look, you might not be able to do anything. It might not be an area where you have a connection, but at least you can point them in the right direction, or at least acknowledge that and try to be helpful regardless, or try to find some other route, even if you yourself can't do it. That's important. Because at the end of the day, it's a relationship. It's a service orientation to have. They're out there. The founders are working their butts off. So I think we really want to be mindful and thoughtful of how they're kind of what they're going through, and being empathetic and supportive regardless of the situation. So, but definitely agree with all the points so far here. One question, I think, and this is maybe more structural, and I think Shishir alluded to a little bit of this, is that both of you, have pretty meaty roles. I mean, one's CEO, one's running a massive business unit at one of the largest tech companies in the world. How do you guys balance out kind of the angel investing and kind of the core focus? And it can be everything from more like a mindset and a structure, but also even detail wise, like, do you have certain days where, this is my founder day, or this is my founder evenings, or you kind of have maybe a service level agreement with some of the founders, like maybe once a month check in. I'm just curious on how you guys operate in that regard.
I mean, founders are busier than investors. So I've found that most of the founders, they'll only ask when they specifically need help on certain things. I've besides some basic hygiene around, be mindful of responding to every investor update, even if a simple thought or just context specific question or a lending hand. I've used the pull model, historically, in the last decade plus, where whenever a founder needs any help, they'll just pull me in, and the help tends to be around, they know where I can add value. Could be sometimes it's basic nuts and bolts of company building. Oftentimes it's product strategy. More often than not, it's about closing candidates. I think that's I look at the last couple of years, closing candidates, especially senior leaders, has been on a bunch of calls for that. So it's a pull model, and I haven't found it. I mean, it means that I watch a fewer shows or movies on the Prime Video or Netflix and so on. So I have to create some time, but I haven't found that to be draining, to be honest. Because founders have been very mindful of only reaching out when they absolutely need it, and because they themselves are busy.
Yeah, I could maybe jump off from there. I mean, I think I definitely agree on the pull model. I think as a CEO entrepreneur myself, the last thing you want is to be that investor advisor who creates work. And so you definitely have people who take the other approach. I think that the practice of responding to every investor update is really good. I think I often tell companies it's up to you to be open and vulnerable enough that people can know where to jump in. Some companies will send out investor updates that are actually quite clear on where they could use help, whereas others do it sort of performatively. But one thing I was going to say on closing candidates, and I think closing candidates is an interesting one, where I don't think that people use that technique enough. And I think it's very effective. There are a list of things that I think that people don't think to use their investors and advisors for, closing candidates being a really good one. Another one I think is, I just want to do a strategy brainstorm, and I don't yet have a decision to be made. I just want somebody to bounce these ideas off, because for whatever reason, I'm lacking the person to do it in my company. Those types of things, I think people, for some reason, don't turn to their investors and advisors to do. On closing candidates, I was going to add one thought that I think, one frame for this that I think is helpful is, I think I have this analogy I use a lot. I call it small pond, big pond, which is that, when you're joining a company, you're either going to be the small fish in a big pond, or you're going to be the big fish in a small pond. And when you're going to be the small fish in a big pond, you have to worry about the size of the fish. So if you're going to join Google, or you're going to join Facebook, or so on, you need to worry about, what's my title going to be? Who am I going to report into? What's my first project? Will I get promoted? All of those things are really important. When you're going to be the big fish in a small pond, you have to worry about the size of the pond. And the interesting thing about that is, we don't really teach employees how to judge the size of ponds. We teach investors how to judge the size of ponds. So one of the reasons I think it's so important for investors to be available for this, and for CEOs to ask their investors to help, is when somebody's choosing to join your company, before they decide to invest their time, they should really be thinking about it as, would I invest my money in this company? And the easiest place to go for that is to go call a set of investors and say, I know you're not sort of pot committed to this company. You didn't join it, but you chose to invest in it versus others. What did you think? And I think sharing your investment thesis and so is obviously very helpful. But I think there's a perspective that the third-party investor can give that the company really can't give. I think it's a really important part of the decision-making process for candidates.
Yeah. No, I love that big pawn, small pawn dynamic too, because I think, no, you're right. Like if you're an incumbent company or even a late stage startup, the org structure, the opportunities to move up and kind of grow, maybe a little bit stifled or limited, right? And whereas you got someone who's high energy, high potential, and really wants to take a more of a leadership role, startup's a great opportunity to do that, right? And so that might be kind of always the classic. And then making sure that there's something at the end of the tunnel. Otherwise, like, you know, they can get excited there. Okay, question from Rahul. Yeah, big pond, small pond, just in terms of like, you know, if you're a big fish in a small pond, you have a greater opportunity to make an impact, get promoted faster, take on more senior leadership roles because you're growing with the CEO, you're growing with the founders. Whereas if you're going to a much larger, more established company, it's just going to be more challenging because you probably have incumbent folks, you probably have already structures or promotion paths laid out, and so it just becomes harder. And that's the way to get kind of top talent into a early stage company a little bit faster.
I mean, the other reason I like that analogy is just remember when you're joining a company, you're getting on the bus with everybody else in the company. So if the pond grows, then you grow, and if it doesn't, then you don't. So I think that's the sort of heart of the analogy: is think like an investor first.
Yeah, you know, actually, Kenan, on one thing you mentioned, I'm always curious how people do this. When you mention closing candidates, are you like, is it around giving the thesis around the company? Is it around the personal dynamic, or what are some of the things you leverage on behalf of the founders so you can get that, you know, that recruit really excited?
It's really, I mean, for me, it's been why I invested. I do an elevator pitch of, you know, my memo, like, hey, this is why I invested. If the investment was, say, a couple of years ago, so this is why I invested. These were my hypotheses. This is where it has gone right. This is where it has gone wrong. And then it really boils down to the team and the founders, that whether or not I believe in the team and why I believe in the team and so on. So far it has worked out. I mean, just the sharing the investment memo and say, look, this is where the company has performed or not, and here's why I think that gives them a lens into my process from a third party, not entirely objective, because, you know, they know that I'm doing a stealth call of sorts. It's still a third party, and I have skin in the game, you know, because I've invested some money in it.
I think that's, you know, what you just shared too, besides just closing the candidate, is just probably a good standard practice as an angel. Like, I'm not saying you got to do a full research report. Obviously, you've got to delegate. Everyone's busy. But just writing down one page on like why you're excited about it, your hypotheses, what you think they're going to prove out next year or so, that's just probably good discipline. But then sharing that with someone, I mean, that just lends an air of credibility and strength to the founder. They must appreciate that. That's really exciting. So awesome. I know we got a few minutes left. Maybe we'll round up with one last question that came up, was around partnering with VC funds and the dynamic there. And I know sometimes that can be very collaborative. Sometimes that can be a little more fraught because of ownership issues. But curious on both of you guys how you've managed that dynamic, whether it's been conflict, maybe misalignment. So, yeah.
I personally almost never have conflict with VC. I think it's very important, actually. And there's a couple of reasons why it's very important. I mean, obviously, for many of us who do this as a hobby or as a part-time thing, I don't have time to do the type of diligence that I know that great firms do. So that's really important. And they tend to source the best deals. I also think it's a good way to watch for adverse selection. And I think the heart of a lot of investing is watching for things that will lead you to investments or places to invest your time that are not great. And so you kind of want the ones where I always tell people, if you need my money, I'm probably not the right investor for you. There's lots and lots of people out there to get money. And so the places where I end up finding the most interest are ones where they don't really need my money. They're going to squeeze me into it, but they really want some insight or some time or so on. I personally haven't found cap table issues to be that big an issue, but one of the things I'd say, and I do this my own in my own company as well. If you go to coda.io/about, you'll see I have over 100 angel investors in Coda. I tell people, write the smallest check you want to write. And it's interesting how much, I don't know why CEOs sometimes put minimums on checks, and I've never really understood it. They tell me it's legal paperwork, but you usually batch them all up anyway. So the marginal cost for new angel investors is actually generally quite small. And I just find that, first off, as a CEO, some of the people that wrote $5,000 checks in Coda have added way more value than some of the people that wrote, multiple $100,000 checks in Coda. And on the flip side, I'll find that I'll end up in a company, and I'll have people that tell me, well, I won't do anything unless I invest this much money. It's not the only time you're going to invest. Your relationship will grow. So fighting for, I think it's really important. Don't be up against the VCs fighting for cap table space, because all you're going to do is create adverse selection of the ones that have enough space for you, and that's actually the wrong set of companies that you want to be in anyway. So.
Yeah, I agree 100%. I think that a couple of tactical things in addition to that I'll add for angels. It's to work with fewer firms and fewer partners within the firms and go deeper. So I think given a choice between going to all the events the firm may organize, for instance, or may invite you to, versus having a few deeper conversations with a few folks at the fund, I think I'll choose the latter. And also not just have meaningful relationships and conversations with non-GP team members at funds. That has been very helpful. I think it may be tempting to just look for the GP level connection. So I'd recommend doing both. And I agree. I think as Shishir mentioned, I think there's a lot a firm can offer in terms of especially due diligence and just the broader being part of the community is super helpful. So highly recommend having the right relationships with various firms that.
Yeah, I think that's also a good point where, generally speaking, every firm is a little different, right? But the junior level folks may have a better ear to the ground around high-level deal flow, what's going on, market level. I mean, they're doing a lot of diligence, market mapping, outbound, and then doing first meetings. And also find opportunities that may be more fit for you versus, versus the fund itself. And so they'll kind of, that's an interesting relationship to drive. I know we're a little bit over, but appreciate, this has been great. Both of you guys, I always love chatting, catching up. Appreciate you taking the time. I think we'll be sending some notes and some follow-up from the discussion today. And then be sure to check out, obviously, Amazon Podcast for Kent to give you a little plug there. And then Shashir's great post on formats of bundling. Cannot recommend kind of the thinking. You got to read that a few times, actually, to really let it sink in. But how to drive it. They're not making advertising revenue. I'm just saying that because I'm a big fan. But with that, for those of you in the audience, I think we got 150 of you. Woo, we got a big group here. Elaine just texted me a little note here. When we wrap things up, just tell the folks, pick the session that you want to attend next from the menu, and then you'll be on your way. I think we've got another one starting already. So, but thank you all for joining today. This was a lot of fun. Hopefully some quick learnings, and we'll see you all soon. So awesome.
Thank you.
Thank you.